Before you watch this powerful story, please like and subscribe so you never miss the moment when corruption gets exposed and justice is served. Hit the notification bell to stay updated. ***. It was a cold February morning on the streets of Los Angeles when everything changed for Officer Frank Richardson. He was having a routine morning patrol, looking for homeless people to harass. He had been doing this for years, targeting vulnerable people, pushing them around, making their lives harder. He did it because he could. He did it because no one ever stopped him. But on this particular morning, Frank made a critical mistake. He kicked the wrong person. The man he kicked was sleeping on a bench in a public park. He was black, appeared to be homeless, and was wearing torn clothes. To Frank, he looked like an easy target. Someone who had no power, no voice, no way to fight back. What Frank didn't know was that the man he kicked was Captain Michael Thompson, an undercover internal affairs investigator who had been investigating police brutality and corruption for the past 8 months. Captain Thompson had been living on the streets, infiltrating homeless communities, documenting exactly how cops like Frank treated the most vulnerable people in society. Captain Thompson had just caught Frank red-handed on camera. What followed was a day of reckoning that would shake the entire Los Angeles Police Department and send a clear message. Corruption and racism would no longer be tolerated. #####, build the story slowly and clearly. Officer Frank Richardson had been with the Los Angeles Police Department for 16 years. On paper, Frank's record looked decent. He had made several arrests. He had received some commendations. He had been promoted to senior officer. He had no major disciplinary actions in his file. But the truth was very different from what was on paper. Frank had a pattern of behavior that had gone undetected for years. He would target homeless people, particularly homeless people of color. He would stop them, question them, search them, and often arrest them for minor infractions like trespassing or loitering. In many cases, the charges wouldn't hold up in court, and the homeless people would be released. But the damage had been done. They had spent time in jail. They had been traumatized. Their trust in the system had been further eroded. Frank did this because he held a deep racist ideology. He believed that homeless people were criminals. He believed that black people were inherently more dangerous than white people. He believed that the poor deserved to be treated harshly. And he believed that as a police officer, he had the right to enforce his beliefs through intimidation and violence. Frank had never seriously hurt anyone, not yet anyway. But he had pushed people. He had kicked people who were lying down. He had used his authority to demean and degrade. And he had gotten away with it because homeless people rarely had the resources or the voice to fight back. Frank's fellow officers knew about his behavior. Some of them participated in it. Others simply ignored it. The police department had a culture that tolerated racism and brutality if it was directed at the right people, the poor, the homeless, people of color. Captain Michael Thompson knew all about this culture. Captain Thompson was a 22-year veteran of the Los Angeles Police Department. He had risen through the ranks because of his integrity, his intelligence, and his commitment to justice. At 48 years old, he had become the captain of the Internal Affairs Division, the division responsible for investigating police misconduct. Over the years, Captain Thompson had received numerous complaints about Officer Richardson. Complaints about aggressive behavior. Complaints about racial profiling. Complaints about excessive force. But the complaints came from homeless people, and homeless people were often not taken seriously. The cases were difficult to prosecute without evidence. So Captain Thompson had made a decision that shocked many of his colleagues. He had decided to go undercover. For the past 8 months, Captain Thompson had been living on the streets of Los Angeles. He had grown out his hair and beard. He had gotten makeup applied to make him look older. He had torn up his clothes and gotten dirtier. He had lived on the streets, in the parks, under the bridges. He had experienced firsthand what the homeless experienced. And he had documented every instance of police brutality and racism that he witnessed. Captain Thompson carried a hidden camera in his coat. He had a backup team monitoring him at all times. But as far as anyone on the street knew, he was just another homeless man trying to survive. His mission was to gather evidence of police misconduct that could stand up in court. His mission was to expose the racism and brutality that had gone unchecked for far too long. And his mission was to create real, meaningful change in the LAPD. On February 14th, Valentine's Day, Captain Thompson had been sleeping on a park bench in downtown Los Angeles. It was early morning, around 6:30 a.m. The sun was just beginning to rise. The streets were starting to come alive with the beginning of a new day. Captain Thompson had deliberately positioned himself in one of the areas where Officer Frank Richardson regularly patrolled. He had done this several times before without incident. But this time would be different. This time, Frank would lose his temper. #### make viewers emotionally invested. Officer Frank Richardson's patrol car pulled up to the park at 6:35 a.m. Frank was in a bad mood. He had been dealing with personal problems. His wife had recently discovered his affair, and they were heading toward divorce. His kids were angry at him. His home life was falling apart. But at work, Frank could exert control. At work, he could make people feel small so that he could feel big. When Frank spotted Captain Thompson sleeping on the bench, he immediately recognized an opportunity to take out his frustrations. Frank pulled his patrol car over and got out. He approached the bench where Captain Thompson was lying down, his hidden camera recording every moment. "Hey you! Wake up!" Frank shouted, his voice loud and aggressive. Captain Thompson slowly opened his eyes, pretending to be groggy and confused. He sat up on the bench, looking at Frank with a mixture of fear and wariness. This was exactly the kind of situation homeless people faced all the time. "Sir, you need to move along," Frank said, his hand resting on his belt near his handcuffs. "You can't sleep in the park. It's against the law." "I'm sorry, officer," Captain Thompson said in a quiet voice, trying to sound frightened and compliant. "I didn't know. I was just resting for a minute. I'll go." Captain Thompson began to stand up slowly. But Frank wasn't satisfied with compliance. Frank wanted confrontation. Frank wanted an opportunity to exert his power. "You know what? I've seen you in this park before," Frank said, his voice taking on an accusatory tone. "And I'm tired of seeing you here. You're a vagrant. You're probably a criminal. You're probably a drug addict." "No, sir, I'm not," Captain Thompson started to say. "Shut up," Frank interrupted. "I don't want to hear it. I'm going to search you. Put your hands against the bench." Captain Thompson complied. He had known this was a possibility. He had trained for this. Frank conducted a search, and of course, he found nothing. Captain Thompson was carrying only a few belongings, some identification that was part of his cover, some money and nothing illegal. But Frank wasn't done. "You're lucky I don't arrest you right now," Frank said. "But I'm going to give you something to remember me by. I'm going to give you a reason to stop coming to this park." And with that, Frank pulled his leg back and kicked Captain Thompson forcefully in the shin. Captain Thompson fell to the ground, pain shooting through his leg. The kick had been forceful enough to cause real injury. He could feel blood dripping down his leg where the boot had made contact with his skin. "That's what happens to people like you who don't listen," Frank said. "Now get out of my sight. And if I ever see you in this park again, it's going to be a lot worse." Frank walked back to his patrol car and drove away, leaving Captain Thompson sitting on the ground, nursing his injured leg. Captain Thompson lay on the bench for a few minutes, making sure the camera had captured everything. Then he pulled out his phone and called his team. "Package received," he said quietly. "Target engaged. Full footage recorded. Injury documented. Beginning medical documentation protocol." Within 30 minutes, a van pulled up to the park. It looked like any other van, but inside were Captain Thompson's team. They helped him into the van and immediately began photographing and documenting his injuries. Captain Thompson's shin had a significant bruise and a laceration. There was visible blood. There was going to be a mark for weeks. "That's battery," one of the team members said. "That's absolutely prosecutable." Captain Thompson nodded. He had what he needed. He had video evidence of police brutality. He had physical evidence, the injury on his leg. He had a credible witness, himself a police captain. This case was going to be impossible for the LAPD to defend. But Captain Thompson wasn't done yet. He had been investigating Frank Richardson for 8 months. He knew that this morning wasn't an isolated incident. He had video footage from other days, other incidents, other homeless people being harassed and brutalized by Frank. Captain Thompson's team spent the next few hours compiling all the evidence. They gathered video footage from 6 different incidents over the past 8 months. They documented encounters with 7 different homeless people. They had evidence of aggressive behavior, racial slurs, illegal searches, and unnecessary force. By noon, Captain Thompson's team had a comprehensive case file against Officer Frank Richardson. Captain Thompson knew that what came next would send shockwaves through the LAPD. He knew that Frank Richardson's career was about to end. And he knew that the message being sent to other police officers would be clear. Racism and brutality would not be tolerated. At 2 p.m., Captain Thompson called the LAPD Chief of Police, Chief Maria Santos. He requested an immediate meeting. When Captain Thompson walked into Chief Santos's office, she did a double take. She had been told that an undercover officer needed to meet with her, but she was shocked to see Captain Thompson in his homeless disguise. He was still wearing the torn clothes. His hair and beard were unkempt. He looked nothing like the polished, professional captain she knew. "Captain Thompson?" Chief Santos said, standing up from her desk. "My God, what happened to you?" "Chief, I need to brief you on an investigation I've been conducting," Captain Thompson said. He sat down across from her and opened his laptop. For the next 2 hours, he walked Chief Santos through the evidence against Officer Frank Richardson. Chief Santos watched the video footage of Frank kicking Captain Thompson. She watched footage of Frank harassing other homeless people. She listened to the racial language Frank used. She saw the pattern of behavior that had gone unchecked for years. By the end of the briefing, Chief Santos's face was pale. She understood the gravity of the situation. She understood that this case was going to blow up. She understood that the LAPD was about to face a serious reckoning. "This is going to be a major story," Chief Santos said quietly. "This is going to change everything." "It needs to," Captain Thompson said firmly. "Officers like Frank Richardson operate in the shadows because no one is watching. They target vulnerable people who don't have the resources to fight back. It's time we made it clear that this kind of behavior will not be tolerated in the LAPD." Karma or the big reveal. At 4 p.m. that same day, Officer Frank Richardson was called into a meeting with Chief Santos, Captain Thompson, and the Internal Affairs team. Frank thought he was going to be interviewed about a minor administrative matter. He had no idea what was about to happen. When he walked into the room and saw Captain Thompson, now properly dressed in his police uniform, his position and authority unmistakable, Frank's face went white. "Sit down, Officer Richardson," Chief Santos said, her voice cold and professional. Frank sat down, confusion and fear spreading across his face. "Do you know Captain Michael Thompson?" Chief Santos asked. "No. I don't think so," Frank stammered. "Captain Thompson is an internal affairs investigator," Chief Santos continued. "He has been conducting an undercover investigation into police brutality and misconduct for the past 8 months. And this morning, he was your victim." The color drained completely from Frank's face. He realized what had happened. The homeless man he had kicked that morning was an LAPD captain. The man he had brutalized had been recording everything. I didn't know," Frank said weakly. "I didn't do anything wrong." "He was. You kicked him," Chief Santos interrupted. "You used excessive force against a person who was complying with your commands. You violated his rights. And you did it on camera." Captain Thompson pulled up the video footage on a screen in the conference room. Frank watched himself kicking Captain Thompson. He watched himself making racist comments. He watched his own brutality played out before him. "Additionally," Chief Santos said, "we have compiled video evidence of 6 separate incidents involving you over the past 8 months. In each case, you engaged in unnecessary force against homeless individuals. In many cases, you used racial slurs. In many cases, you conducted illegal searches. Your pattern of behavior is consistent, deliberate, and discriminatory." Chief Santos pulled out a thick file. "Effective immediately, you are suspended from duty," Chief Santos said. "An investigation by Internal Affairs will be conducted. Evidence has been turned over to the District Attorney's Office. You will likely be prosecuted criminally for battery and civil rights violations." "This is a setup," Frank said desperately. "He provoked me. You kicked a person who was lying down on a bench," Chief Santos said flatly. "There is no provocation that justifies that. And frankly, Officer Richardson, this meeting is over. You are to turn in your badge and your weapon immediately. You are not to set foot in any police facility without authorization. You are suspended pending criminal investigation." Frank was escorted out of the building by Internal Affairs officers. As he left, the reality of his situation was beginning to sink in. His career was over. Criminal charges were coming. His life was about to fall apart in a very public way. Within hours, the story broke. Local news stations were reporting on the story. LAPD officer suspended after undercover captain reveals pattern of brutality against homeless. By evening, the story had spread to national news outlets. By the next morning, it was trending on social media. Hashtag Frank Richardson was trending on Twitter. Videos of his assault on Captain Thompson were being watched by millions of people. But what came next was even more significant. The exposure of Officer Frank Richardson's misconduct led to a broader investigation into the LAPD's culture of racism and brutality. Chief Santos ordered a comprehensive review of all complaints filed against police officers, particularly complaints from homeless people and people of color. What the review revealed was shocking. There were hundreds of complaints about police brutality. There were patterns of racial profiling. There were instances of officers targeting vulnerable populations with minimal oversight. The problem was far more widespread than anyone had realized. The LAPD fired Officer Richardson. Criminal charges were filed against him. He was prosecuted for battery and civil rights violations. He was convicted and sentenced to 2 years in prison. But the consequences went beyond Frank Richardson. The investigation led to policy changes throughout the LAPD. New procedures were implemented for investigating complaints. New training programs were created on implicit bias and racism. New accountability measures were put in place. Several other officers were disciplined or fired based on evidence uncovered during the investigation. Millions of dollars in settlements were paid to victims of police brutality. Most importantly, the message was sent throughout the police department and throughout Los Angeles. Racism and brutality would not be tolerated. Officers who engaged in this behavior would face consequences. Captain Thompson became a media sensation. News outlets wanted to interview him about his undercover experience. Civil rights organizations celebrated him as a hero. The mayor gave him a public commendation. But Captain Thompson remained focused on what mattered most: creating systemic change within the police department. Hashtag the moral takeaway. 6 months after Officer Richardson's arrest, Captain Thompson sat down for a major interview with a national news program. "What motivated you to go undercover?" the interviewer asked. "I became frustrated," Captain Thompson explained. "We were receiving complaints about police brutality, but the complaints were coming from people without resources, people without power. Homeless people, people of color, people in poverty. And the system wasn't taking their complaints seriously. I realized that the only way to create real change was to get evidence that couldn't be ignored. To document the behavior myself." "What was the most difficult part about living on the streets?" the interviewer asked. "Experiencing the brutality firsthand," Captain Thompson said. "I knew intellectually that it was happening, but experiencing it myself, feeling the pain of that kick, seeing how vulnerable people are treated by police officers who are supposed to protect them, that was eye-opening. I came to understand that this isn't just an individual problem with individual bad officers. This is a systemic problem. The culture that allows officers like Frank Richardson to do what he does comes from the top. It comes from policies, from training, from the way we talk about certain populations." "Do you think the changes are sufficient?" the interviewer asked. "No," Captain Thompson said honestly. "We've made progress. We've fired officers. We've created new policies. But there's still much more work to be done. The problem is that racism and abuse are endemic to the way policing has been conducted in this country. We can't just fix it with a few policy changes. We need a fundamental shift in how we think about policing, how we treat vulnerable populations, and how we hold ourselves accountable." Captain Thompson's message resonated with millions of people. The story of his undercover investigation had become a symbol of accountability in policing. It had shown that even within the system, there were people who cared about justice. But the impact went far beyond just the LAPD. Other police departments across the country were inspired by Captain Thompson's work. Other police chiefs implemented similar undercover investigations. Other departments began taking complaints about brutality more seriously. The case of Officer Frank Richardson became a teaching tool in police academies. New officers were shown the video of Frank's assault on Captain Thompson. They were told the story of what happened. And they were given a clear message. This is what happens when you abuse your authority. This is what happens when you engage in racism and brutality. For the homeless community in Los Angeles, the impact was even more significant. Homeless people who had been brutalized by police felt validated. They saw that their complaints had been heard. They saw that the system could work for them, even if it took extraordinary measures. They felt that they had some protection, some hope. Captain Thompson used his newfound platform to advocate for the homeless. He gave speeches about the crisis of homelessness in America. He pushed for policies that would address the root causes of homelessness, poverty, lack of affordable housing, mental illness, addiction. He argued that policing alone couldn't solve the problem of homelessness, that we needed to address the underlying issues. A year after Frank Richardson's arrest, Captain Thompson was promoted to Deputy Chief of Police. In his new role, he continued to push for reforms. He established a new division dedicated to investigating police misconduct. He implemented new training programs focused on de-escalation and bias awareness. He worked to change the culture of the LAPD from within. One day, Captain Thompson received a letter from a man named Jerome Davis. Jerome was a homeless man who had been harassed multiple times by Officer Richardson. In his letter, Jerome thanked Captain Thompson for what he had done. "You made us visible," Jerome wrote. "You made us matter. You showed the world that people like us, homeless people, we deserve respect and dignity. We deserve to not be kicked by police officers. We deserve to be treated like human beings. Thank you for standing up for us." Captain Thompson read the letter multiple times. It reminded him why he had done what he did. It reminded him that this wasn't just about taking down one bad officer. It was about sending a message to vulnerable people that they matter, that their lives have value, that they deserve to be treated with dignity and respect. Captain Thompson decided to do something significant. He organized a public event where homeless people could share their stories of police brutality. Officers involved in the cases were invited to listen. Community members were invited to participate. The goal was to create a space where the voices of homeless people could be heard and acknowledged. The event was held at a community center in downtown Los Angeles. Hundreds of people attended. Homeless people told their stories. Police officers listened. Community members engaged in dialogue. And slowly, painfully, but meaningfully, people began to see each other as human beings. One homeless woman named Angela spoke about being kicked by a police officer years earlier. She talked about the trauma it caused. She talked about how it had reinforced her belief that the system didn't care about people like her. But she also talked about how Captain Thompson's actions had changed her perspective. She talked about feeling like someone in power actually cared about her. When Angela finished speaking, several police officers stood up and applauded. One of them, a young female officer, approached Angela after the event and apologized for the way she and her colleagues had treated homeless people. She promised to do better. These moments of human connection and understanding were exactly what needed to happen. Not just policy changes, not just criminal prosecutions, but real conversations, real acknowledgement, real change in how people saw each other. Officer Frank Richardson served his time in prison. When he was released, he was a broken man. His career was over. His reputation was destroyed. His family had largely abandoned him. He had experienced firsthand what it felt like to be powerless, to be treated unjustly, to be on the receiving end of a system that didn't care about your humanity. Some people argued that Richardson deserved more punishment. But Captain Thompson believed that Richardson had received what he needed most, a mirror. A chance to see himself as others saw him. A chance to understand the harm he had caused. Richardson never became a prominent advocate or spokesperson. But he did quietly volunteer at homeless shelters. He did work to rebuild his life. He did, to some extent, do the work of redemption. But the real story wasn't about Frank Richardson's redemption. The real story was about systemic change. The real story was about what happened when people in power decided to actually listen to the people without power. The real story was about Captain Michael Thompson, a man who had the courage to put on torn clothes and sleep on the streets, who had the commitment to document brutality, who had the integrity to expose what he had found, and who had the vision to use that exposure as a catalyst for real, meaningful change. The final lesson. This story teaches us something crucial about accountability and courage. Officer Frank Richardson operated for 16 years in a system that allowed him to brutalize vulnerable people. He did this because the system enabled him, because homeless people didn't have power, because no one was watching carefully enough, because racism and brutality were tolerated and even normalized within the police department. But the moment someone in power, someone with authority, someone with credibility, documented that behavior and exposed it, everything changed. This is what systemic change looks like. It's not about individual good acts. It's about changing the systems and structures that allow bad behavior to flourish. It's about accountability. It's about having the courage to speak truth to power. It's about being willing to expose uncomfortable truths, even when those truths might reflect poorly on institutions you're part of. Captain Thompson could have ignored what he knew about police brutality. He could have accepted the system as it was. But instead, he made the difficult decision to go undercover, to live on the streets, to experience firsthand what vulnerable people experience. And he used that experience to create change. The lesson for all of us is this: if you have power, use it responsibly. If you see injustice, speak up. If you have the ability to create change, don't accept the status quo. Be willing to make sacrifices. Be willing to take risks. Be willing to challenge the systems you're part of. Because change is possible. It's not easy, but it's possible. And one person with courage and integrity can make all the difference. If this story about accountability, courage, and systemic change inspired you, please like and subscribe so you don't miss the next story about when those in power stand up for justice. Hit the notification bell to stay updated with stories that matter. And in the comments below, share your thoughts about police accountability and systemic change. Have you witnessed police misconduct? Do you believe real reform is possible in policing? Your voice matters, and I'd love to hear your perspective. About this story. This story was crafted to illustrate the importance of systemic accountability in policing and the courage it takes to expose brutality and racism. It shows that meaningful change requires people in power to take real action. Not just words or symbolic gestures, but actual investigation, documentation, and consequences. The story also reminds us that homeless people and vulnerable populations deserve dignity and respect, and that we all have a responsibility to stand up for those who are treated unjustly.